Tonight, we're here to talk to you about executive function and perspective taking and how we address this in the context of the Carroll curriculum and how you might address this at home. I'm here with Gwendolyn Meredith, who's a speech and language pathologist in our middle school, and Jen Kurzrock, who's housed in the lower school. However, we will be touching upon some strategies, both parent and ones we use in the context of the curriculum in the upper school program as well. So while we're just waiting for people to funnel in, we have a few interactive slides to show you, and I'll also go over a bit of the protocols. But while you're waiting, if you want to use the chat feature, and we can kind of go take a look at some of the answers, please in the chat enter what is executive functioning and share what you want to know about it or what you think about when you hear that term. And I'll go ahead and read off some of the answers once we get some of those. And so sort of while I'm waiting, for those of you who are just joining, welcome to our presentation on perspective taking and executive functions. If you could, as you think of it, just tell us what you're interested to know about executive functioning, what you think of when you hear that term. And I'm also just kind of while we're doing that activity, going to go over some of the protocols for this evening. We will have the Q&A feature on at all times. Feel free at any point during the presentation to ask a question. The chat feature we will keep off, but turn on periodically when there's a participatory slide or a question that we have, like right now. So what we will do is we have a really robust presentation, and we hope to answer a lot of your questions in the context of the presentation. Should we not get to anything tonight, there's a parent questions email that will ask you just to email in your questions. And we will also keep track of the ones that you put in the Q&A button, so we make sure to get to you afterwards. So right now, all I'm seeing is one person has said organizing information, but we're still waiting on a lot of people. Okay, somebody else has to say, I think about the ability to balance sensory input, demands on attention, including decision-making and emotional feelings, reactions. Okay, that's a very, very well-educated person on executive functioning. Congratulations. Someone else has to say the ability to manage tasks, requests of daily life, both personally, school, work, could be in easy items or more difficult. So true. I see Gwen and Meredith, Gwendolyn and Jen both nodding at that one. So again, kind of while we're waiting, we have another little slide that we're going to do as an activity. And Amy, I'm just going to ask you to move ahead one slide. Okay, here. So now we want you to take a look at what is perspective taking. Please share with us things that you want to know or what you think of when you hear that prompt. And someone had to say the ability to appreciate consequences. And you can put these in the Q&A or you can put these in the chat. Ability to make it to the door in the morning with homework, lunch, and coat. I feel like that was one of their executive function ones. Yeah. Very good. And as people are just funneling in, we're expecting a fairly large crowd. We're going to go to the formal presentation in just a minute. We're here tonight with Gwendolyn Meredith, who's a speech and language pathologist in the middle school, and Jen Kurzrock, who's based in the lower school. But as I said, we'll be addressing kind of parent strategies and things we use as part of the Carroll curriculum for the upper school as well. We'll span all three divisions. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Just to reiterate, we will be using the Q&A button to answer questions in the context of the presentation. Anything we don't get to tonight, we're glad to follow up with you on email. So again, welcome, and I'm going to hand it over to Jen and Gwendolyn. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I can get us started. So thanks, Stacy, for introducing us. I'm Jen Kurzrock. I am the speech language pathologist housed at the lower school. So I work with our 1st through 5th graders. And then Gwendolyn, do you want to pop on for a sec?
Yes, hello. My name is Gwendolyn Meredith. I'm in the middle school. Historically, I've worked with the 7th grade team, and this year I've moved up with the 8th grade team. However, I also work closely with Samantha La Rochelle, who's the 7th grade or 6th grade SLP. So the whole breadth in the middle school.
All right, so here's sort of our agenda of where we're going to go tonight. We're going to start by defining some of our terms, and then we'll talk a little bit about attention, a little bit about situational awareness and self-monitoring skills. We'll move into working memory and then talk through a couple different components of organization. So we can start with defining our terms. Actually, just kidding. We have one thought that we sort of wanted to open with, which this is a we believe statement that is actually pulled from our it's our we believe statements, which I think are not actually part of our mission statement, but they're kind of affiliated with our mission statement. And we just wanted to kind of center ourselves in this mission that I'm sure you all have heard us talk about, which is to give each child what they most need. And so this statement that we sort of wanted to highlight is we give each child what they most need by building on student strengths while also addressing their learning differences. And we just wanted to sort of frame the whole talk in the context of, with all of these skills we're going to talk about, we're sort of talking in broad strokes, but all of our kids can vary on any number of these skills and where their strengths lie, where things are relatively challenging for them. So part of GEC, as we sort of engage in that for each of our students, is knowing what some trends are across the profile of our students and building in supports and strategies to support all of our students, but also then knowing when a student needs something different and tailoring and tweaking from there.
Thank you for that, Jen. That individualization of executive functioning support is so important at every single level. And this other piece we really wanted to take a moment to talk with everyone about is this gradual release model. Now, this is something that we use at Carroll just sort of to highlight how whenever we teach anything, whether it's a new note-taking concept or a new math strategy or an executive functioning strategy, like highlighting key details in a text, you always start with lots of teacher modeling and support. So what we do is we model and have students have maximum support at the beginning, and then slowly and gradually give them more and more responsibility. So that way we might be slowly removing some teacher support until they're completely independent. And so some of the times it might be appropriate for a fifth grader to still have teacher support on some of these executive functioning skills, as it is appropriate for them at that level. And then towards the end of eighth grade, we're gearing more towards that student application process for some of these. And you really can see that highlighted with our student planners that we're going to show you in just a moment, and how we try and keep it developmentally appropriate. Oh, and here we go. So these are examples of some of our lower school homework planners that Jen Kurzrock works with often. So you can see in the BR2 planners, there's tons of visuals. They're mostly tracking the book titles. In the third grade, they have the ability to have it scaffolded where you can see the get ready, do, done. That helps them plan out how they're going to complete their homework process. And then in fifth grade, they're helping tracking out more on like a weekly calendar. However, this is still lots of teacher scaffolding, and you notice how it's appropriate for the grade levels here. And then that's going to change a little bit as we get up to middle school and eighth grade. So in the middle school and upper school, you can see we have some slightly different homework planners. In sixth through eighth grade, we have one planner. However, the way it's used is very different in sixth grade and eighth grade. In sixth grade, teachers will work with students to write down their homework at the end of every single class period. And then at the end of the day, they all have to get their planners signed off. In seventh grade, teachers might mention the homework and prompt students to write it down. And then at the end of the day, it'll always be checked. By eighth grade, the homework will be written on the board, and it's part of the students do now to independently write down their homework assignments. And students who show that they're completing their homework assignments independently might not get a homework planner check because they're at that level where they're independent. Other students who might need a little bit more support with planning and organizing their homework materials would probably still be getting those independent homework planner checks. Then at the upper school, they have this homework planner where at the end of the day, they get to touch base with their teacher and take a look and write down all their materials there. They also have a schedule that they can utilize independently and track their goals as well. So showing there, you can see how the upper school homework planner looks very different than the BR2 homework planner. Just trying to make sure that we keep students in this space where they're supported, but they can also grow. As you can see, as we're Here's another example of gradual release with our Ruby Bridges Day.
So we wanted to touch on Ruby Bridges Day, which we celebrated a couple of weeks ago on all 3 of our campuses, sort of as an example of how do we vary a skill for sort of this gradual release model and a developmental model for something that's a little harder to see and less tangible than something like homework. So our school-wide theme this year is perspectives and perspective taking, which was the inspiration for our sort of executive function topic this evening. And so what that looked like was, as a whole school, we talked about what is a perspective, what does that word mean, what does it mean to perspective take, and we sort of taught that at different levels. And also we sort of addressed Ruby's story at different levels. And then there was an activity for all of the students to complete, but that was also varied by grade level. So for our youngest students in BR2, that looked like thinking about feelings words. Like, what do we think Ruby felt on that day? And then our 3rd graders were really thinking about this idea of perspectives of a thought, feeling, and experience all together. So they worked on Ruby's perspective. And then our 4th graders, sort of one step removed from I'm the student in this situation, Ruby's the student in that situation, they thought about the teacher's perspective. And then our 5th graders thought about the parents' perspectives. What was it like for Ruby's parents on that day, or the parents of the other students in the school? And then sort of as we moved up to the middle school, at our middle school and upper school campuses, they addressed multiple perspectives. So how do we hold the experience that everyone had on that day? And then they also started making comparisons to our current world. And how does that perspective compare to the perspective I have, or my classmates have, or my parents have, sort of balancing that all out. So sort of we had the same school-wide theme and activity, but it was varied sort of developmentally as we moved up.
So the reason gradual release is really so important at Carroll, and it should be everywhere else you're teaching students, is you're trying to keep the students in what educators call the zone of proximal development, which is kind of like this fancy term for the Goldilocks zone, where things aren't too challenging, where students are regularly failing and it's impacting their self-esteem and they're getting frustrated and they want to quit. But it's not so easy that they're just flying through it and they're not learning and challenging. It's in this little blue zone, as you can see through our model, where they're saying, I can do it with the help and support to help me feel motivated and like I am being challenged and learning in an appropriate way. And so whenever we are modifying things or working with teams and teachers to support a student, we're always trying to keep the student within that zone of proximal development. So we just threw a lot of information and we're going to throw a little bit more at you. My big thing is, what is executive functioning? Really, it's a big umbrella term that we use to describe a number of different cognitive skills that are lower level skills like shifting attention, organizing time or materials, selecting appropriate goals, prioritizing, smaller nitty-gritty things that we will get into. But all of these executive functions and cognitive skills help us complete daily tasks. Like I think somebody in the chat mentioned getting your homework and lunch out the door on time in the morning. So the executive functions are those small cognitive skills that work together to help us solve problems and complete these larger regular daily tasks.
And then we also wanted to define what we mean when we talk about perspective taking. So perspective taking, when we think about it as a cognitive skill, is being able to take the viewpoint of another person so that we can understand what they're thinking, their feelings, what they might know about the world, even if that's different from what we know about the world, what they might be trying to say, even if their language was ambiguous. So I think an example for that is, if a kid comes home at the end of the day and they say, oh, happened again in math class, without giving you that context, you know what they know about their world and their previous experience to be able to interpret that, and a whole lot more. And that can sort of range from the very concrete level of understanding that other people see things differently. So that's sort of like our comic there on the left, which is, depending on where you're standing, you are physically having a different experience than the other person. And then it can sort of get less concrete, moving towards that two different people can have different concrete experiences, or they can have different experiences of the same concrete situation based on their experience. So that's sort of our other comic of boat versus land there, that we're looking at the same situation, but they might experience it differently. And then we can move all the way to the most abstract level of understanding that different people will perceive different situations entirely based off of their previous experiences, their thoughts, their feelings, and sort of their whole lives as they brought it to the table. So that's what we mean about sort of these levels of perspective taking as a cognitive skill. And then the other term we also wanted to define is social pragmatics, which is going to come up a lot because social pragmatics is a language-based skill that actually really sits sort of in this middle ground in between executive function skills, perspective taking skills, and communication. Because it's sort of how do we do all those things at once? So when we're referring to social pragmatics, we're really talking about how we're able to use language as a tool, not just language for language's sake, but as a tool to navigate a social space. So that can be concrete skills like taking turns in a conversation or balancing how much airtime you have in the conversation, staying on topic, both knowing what that topic is and when you veered off topic, using your language flexibly for different purposes. And that can be really concrete, like multiple meaning words, or it can get all the way up with older grades into figurative language and being able to think flexibly about language, making group decisions and the skills of compromising, which is hard for a lot of our students, changing a plan based off of the needs you hear from other people, and regulating your emotions during a conversation. So it's really just encompassing all of those skills of when I understand myself in this situation, when I understand someone else, and I'm using my executive functions to engage in this conversation and attend to this conversation and the others in the conversation, how can I then use language to participate in this social interaction?
All right, thank you for listening through all of those definitions that we just wanted to give and share to you all. We do have one case study this evening. For any of you who were with us last year, we did a series of case studies throughout the presentation for every single different type of executive functioning. However, tonight, we just wanted to do one kind of more in-depth case study to give you just a brief look into what it might look like for a child who has executive functioning deficits that makes it challenging for them to perspective take with other students or build those strong Later that day, the teacher was pleased to see Cassandra was talking with others at recess. However, the conversation didn't last very long. When the teacher asked what happened, Cassandra said that Stephanie was in the middle of sharing a story about her fishing trip in Maine, which then reminded Cassandra about her fishing trip off the coast of Florida. Unfortunately, Stephanie seemed kind of upset and walked away after Cassandra interrupted her to say that she went to Florida last summer. She knew that she probably should have let Stephanie finish her story, but she was so excited, she simply couldn't help herself from sharing that connection with her. The next day, Cassandra was talking with Rowan about this new game they both enjoy. However, Rowan looked kind of confused after Cassandra excitedly and kind of disorganized account of the newest level. Rowan wasn't really able to follow her story, so he apparently started thinking about something else. Cassandra felt hurt when she asked him a question and he responded with, "What are we talking about again?" She didn't give up though. At the end of that day, she was talking with Stephanie about their new class project. Cassandra was listening, but then she started taking something out of her book bag and immediately remembered that she forgot her vocab book in class. So she ran up and went to go grab her vocab book. Her teacher saw how hard Cassandra was trying to connect with others, but it seemed that something was always trying to get in the way. And that's just a quick view as the day in life in Cassandra, a fictional student that we wrote. It might give you guys a little bit of a personal connection to what this might look like for a student with executive functioning deficits trying to make new friends. So the first subset that we're going to talk about is attention. While not technically an executive function itself, attention is an important bedrock foundation that we'll talk about. So when I was in undergrad, one of my cognition professors always used to say that attention is the foundation of cognition, because if you're not attending to it or paying attention, you will not be processing that sensory information, as attention is almost like this filter that either amplifies or increases a sensory information, so something you see, hear, smell, taste, or feel, or it then can decrease it, so you're not constantly distracted by all the little sights and sounds around you. However, for some students, if their attention is not working, they might be a little bit distracted. And there's various subtypes of attention that could be impacted, such as sustained attention, which is your ability to focus for a certain period of time on a task. Selective attention, which is your ability to focus on one specific thing and filter out other sensory information. Or alternating attention, which is your ability to shift between multiple different sensory details at once, all of which are very important for regular day-to-day work. And it's important to note that students may have strengths or challenges or one or more different types of these attention subtypes. So if a student is having trouble paying attention to a friend talking, it might impact them while making connections, because perspective taking requires a student to shift their attention away from their own thoughts, feelings, and desires to the viewpoints of multiple other people.
So this is kind of just an overview. Attention challenges can look many, many different ways, but this is some of the more traditional things we might see with individuals who struggle with attention. So that might look like fidgeting, restlessness, difficulty sitting still. It might be sitting quietly and sort of staring off to the side, or kids who report that they're daydreaming. Or it might be the students who very consistently ask, wait, what? After they've heard a direction, because they haven't quite attended to it. It might also sort of alternatively look like students who don't have a filter or make impulsive decisions or impulsively participate in conversations. Or it may be students who are struggling to focus during events that are longer, which can be things like a 45-minute class period. And we can jump to the next slide. And sort of how that relates to our specific topic this evening is that 50 to 60% of children with ADHD report that they struggle with peer relationships. And what is really underlying that is that these same struggles that we just talked about can come up in these social interactions. So that same impulsivity can look like impulsively grabbing something or impulsively moving your body, but it can also present as impulsivity in conversations, or what we would call blurting. Difficulty attending to multiple stimuli can also present as difficulty attending to both verbal and nonverbal communication at the same time. So noticing not just your words, but also what someone is doing with their face and their body and their tone, and how that might impact what their words actually mean. It might look like missing key information in a conversation. It may look like not having your body in the group, which is our students who are listening and hear the information, but are wandering or pacing, or often facing away from the people who are speaking. And it may just look like easily distracted during conversations. So some of what those supports for attention might look like at the lower school, really our biggest focus in the lower school is on helping our littlest students understand what it feels like when you are attending, and then noticing when you're not attending and teaching some explicit strategies to help you get back in that zone. So our 1st through 4th graders all participate in a curriculum taught by our social workers, which is a class called Community Building, which this is actually really the major focus of community building, is explicit teaching of these strategies. That can be things like zones of regulation, which is a fairly common curricula to use with students, that teaches sort of what it feels like physiologically when we're having different levels of attention or emotional state, and then strategies to help you get into what we call the green zone, which is ready to learn, ready to attend. And the other thing that we will really look at a lot at the lower school is really structured transitions, and really visual structured transitions, to help our students understand what they're transitioning into, what are the expectations, what do they need to attend to, and help them get their body ready to do all of that. And then there's also some individual strategies. So many of our students benefit from brain breaks. We do some explicit teaching of different ways to take brain breaks, what that might look like, how to recognize when you need one, how to take one productively, and then very importantly, how to come back from a brain break and rejoin the class. Many of our students will use modified seating like a wobble cushion or a wobble stool. We'll use a fidget, might have a secret silent signal with a teacher for when they need a break or when they need to sort of key back into what's happening in the lesson. And then from the social and perspective taking piece, that looks at supporting kids really at this core level to engage in a conversation. So I work with the youngest students a lot on what we call balanced conversations, and that's really attending to what's happening around you in the conversation, and whether people are getting frustrated, whether people are bored, how much airtime you're taking up, and then being able to attend to and use that information to participate in a conversation.
So in the middle school, we use all of those same strategies and structures, but then we do just make it middle school appropriate at that level. So all of our classes use whole class strategies, like the same built-in brain breaks throughout our curriculum that is multi-sensory, so students can be processing multiple different sensory ways. We have space and time sections in our classrooms, which is a part of the responsive classroom curriculum that is very appropriate for middle schoolers because it's really trying to teach them independence with self-regulation, meaning the ability to help them calm down and refocus their attention when they're feeling distracted. So in 6th grade, we might be prompting a student to take some space and time, but then by 8th grade, we just have a section that might have fidgets or mindfulness journals where students can go and help themselves refocus if they notice they're not in the zone, as Jen put it. We also use whole class strategies like the structured lecture transitions and lecture design. So every single class always starts with the do now. So as they're transitioning, they know exactly what to do, and the exit ticket. So as they're exiting, they know exactly how they should exit each day. The exit tickets might just be a question they have to answer as they walk out the door. We also use repetition and rephrasing of directions. So we're constantly saying the directions multiple times. So if a student happened to not be paying attention, they'll probably hear the directions once or twice more. We also, in the process of GEC, or giving each child, have a number of individual strategies that I might work with, or our counselors might work with students to teach them, such as using fidgets or white noise machines for students who are easily distracted by auditory stimuli during work. The upper school has these wonderful wobble stools that help students move around while they're working in classes. They like to have students self-reflect and sometimes even use visual reminders, either little notebooks or notepads somewhere in their computer to help them remember what their body looks like when they're paying attention and what it looks like when they might be a little distracted. We do also offer curriculum in the middle school focused on mindfulness training during health and wellness, and then some attention strategies curriculum as well. So one thing is just to think about some of these attention strategies, like brain breaks, a space and time corner that's a quiet corner where students can go and always find a mindfulness journal or fidget tools or coloring books or white noise machines. And think about some of these strategies that you could use at home. This might be a good time to type in the chat as well. Thank you for that. And our next one that we will be transitioning to is our working memory topic, which is a personal favorite of mine. So I'm very excited to share this with you all. So working memory is what we call the mental workbench. So this is where any information that we are currently using for a goal is stored, managed, manipulated just for a short period of time to help us complete that task. So there's quite a few components and models of working memory. The main piece that's really important to differentiate is it's not just one skill. There's a number of different sub-skills as well. The phonological loop is
So Gwendolyn, I think your audio went out.
I think she might have lost our audio as well.
Oh.
Oh, I think you're back, Gwendolyn. Can you, we lost you right when you started to say what the phonological loop was.
Oh no, I sincerely apologize. Might be able to get a Wi-Fi booster going on. So spiraling back to the phonological loop, that is where auditory information is stored. So that is where if a child is hearing directions or listening to a conversation and they're trying to think of a response, that is where all of that information will be stored for a short period of time. The visual spatial sketchpad is where you're storing visual information as well. And the episodic buffers where they might be storing things that just happened in the space around them in this short period of time. And all of this is managed by the central executive. And it's important to note that there might be some students who have stronger auditory working memory than visual working memory, and other students that have stronger visual working memory than auditory working memory. So by understanding the various subsections of working memory, we can try and give students as many scaffolds and support to really boost in on that strength that they have. The one really important fact about working memory, there's so many, is that it is pervasive, which means that it is a cognitive function that helps us with almost every single daily task, from cooking, making coffee, crafting, and talking with friends. Anything that requires you to complete a task, probably going to take you through your working memory. So, in conversations and perspective taking, it is so important. If you're listening to your friend, working memory helps you hold on to the details that your conversation partner just shared. It helps you with thinking by recalling and sorting through information that's related to the conversation. And then if you're speaking, it helps you remember all fabulous details that you're trying to express to your friends. In our next slide, you can see a little bit more information about working memory at the lower school.
And one thing, Gwendolyn, before we touch on that, that's come up in the chat a little bit, just to clarify, is that we started with talking about attention because, as Gwendolyn mentioned, that's sort of the bedrock and sort of the step one to access any of this cognition. But we don't mean to imply that all of our students have ADHD or attention challenges, because many of our students do have an additional part of their profile that has an attention component, and many of our students don't. But that being said, all of the strategies we're talking about are really good proactive strategies to strengthen these skills for all of our students. And in addition to that, many of our students might not have an ADHD diagnosis, but do struggle with some of the same core executive function skills that an ADHD diagnosis might play into as well, but for separate reasons. So many of our students who have dyslexia do have some challenges with working memory. Many of our students have trouble with organizing their ideas. And part of that is due to these cognitive skills. And part of that is also when reading and writing are hard for you, it's hard to practice organizing your thinking and organizing your reading and your writing. So while some of our students do have an ADHD diagnosis, all of these strategies are really important skill building for all of our students. So back to working memory, that mental workbench that Gwendolyn was telling us about at the lower school, that really the main goal is to help our students hold information on that workbench while they're processing that information. So a lot of that can look like strategies that our teachers use to help students hold that information on that workbench. That can look like visual agendas or visual strategies for what the directions were. So for example, this if-then chart in the middle is something that we use a lot with our BR2 students. And that's a situation where a student might have 3 tasks that they're supposed to complete during class. And if they complete all 3 of those, then they can pick out a building material to use for the last few minutes of class. But rather than just the teacher saying at the front of the room verbally, if you complete, X, Y, and Z, then you can build, and hoping that our kids retain that information and can keep track of which ones they've already done and hold all of that. what is in this chart is on the left-hand side is the 3 tasks they're expected to complete. And then there's each child's picture. So that also when they finish that task, they can go in whatever order they want and then go over and turn the photograph over to sort of signal that they've completed that task. That can also look like teachers, as Gwendolyn mentioned, repeating information multiple times or chunking information into smaller manageable pieces. So even if there may be 6 steps to what we're doing today, students might not need all 6 of those steps right at the beginning of class. And teachers also can embed directions into the worksheet themselves, which a lot of our teachers do, to help students not have to remember what that direction is and hold that while they're doing work, so they don't have to try to hold the information and do what the work that they're doing and then remember what the direction was for the next step and go back and forth. So you can see in this picture of the graphic organizer down on the right, the graphic organizer has the organizational details, but then in that speech bubble, the teacher is reminding the students what to do. And then for students, there's also this big focus of explicitly teaching strategies to the students. And for our youngest students, that is really self-advocacy language and normalizing that it's okay to have lost information, but what does it feel like when that happens and what do you do with that? So Gwendolyn knows this running joke I have, but if you ask any of the classes that I work with, what is Ms. Kurzrock's favorite question? They will either say, can you repeat that? I didn't hear you. Or what does that word mean? Because I talk a lot about how I love when you ask that. Please don't be embarrassed to ask that, because that tells me you noticed that you needed more information to have that information on your workbench and lets me give that to you. So I think all of those pieces helping both the teachers to proactively have strategies in place, repeat information, chunk information, and having students, if they've still missed information, be able to advocate for that are really the focuses for our younger grades.
And all of those focuses are built on in the middle school, because that's really the foundation for what work they're going to be doing there. In middle school, they definitely need to be able to self-advocate when they notice that they don't have all that information on their workbench. So some of those whole class strategies that we just do to benefit all students, regardless of whatever diagnoses or individual needs they might have, is that repetition and rephrasing of directions and expectations is wonderful for students with working memory challenges. So that way, if maybe they forgot a step, they'll get that reminder. So, oh, I forgot I needed to do step 2. Using those multisensory directions and through multisensory components weaved into the lessons means that students who maybe have stronger phonological processing in their working memory, or the
Sorry, I think we lost Gwendolyn's audio again. So sorry to everyone.
Stacy, I'm just looking. Do you know exactly? Oh, there's Gwendolyn. She's back. Never mind.
Oh no. Oh no, I do apologize for that. There we go. So I was talking about formatting assignments to reduce our working memory load, which is a very important task that we do in the middle school to make sure that students aren't having to jump between 5 different tabs on their computer and pull information from one and use it into another doc somewhere. We try and make sure that we have all the information on one document for all of our students. Some of those individual strategies we use is we might check in with students and just make sure they're aware of the directions and they know what the next steps are. You might support them with breaking down some of these kind of challenging multi-step directions. So if a teacher gives them multiple different levels that they have to do next, we can just check in them on every single step to know they're on the right path. We also have curriculum that I've taught a number of times to teach working memory strategies that are very helpful for language and math, such as saying what you want to write out loud as you're writing to kind of help you remember exactly what you want to say, helping you with repeating information that you want to remember or taking notes, and really trying to visualize information to help you remember it. And you see this little visual we have down there, which is the same cognitive model I showed you, but in a more kid-friendly way. So in our next slide, we just want you to take a moment to think about what are some of those strategies that you could use at home. Strategies such as repeating directions, showing directions in multiple different ways, maybe having multi-step directions broken down in a way by giving them one step at a time. All of these things are a great way to help students not get their working memory overloaded and miss key details. So next up, we're going to be talking about the situational awareness and self-monitoring.
All right, so moving into situational awareness, this is my favorite topic. So working memory was Gwendolyn's, this is mine. Situational awareness is understanding what we know about people, places, and routines, and how those are tied to those people, places, and routines, so that we can use that information when we share spaces with others. And it's really that skill that helps us self-monitor our behavior, because if we don't know what's expected in a place, then we can't self-monitor to know if we are in fact doing what's expected in that space. And one way that we work on this is helping us to take sort of implicit skills and implicit cues and make those explicit for our kids. What this will look like with perspective taking, and these two, I think probably of all the topics we're talking about, is probably the most intimately tied to perspective taking in this social pragmatics piece. But that can look like difficulty gauging our language based on a situation. So we can talk about code switching and knowing that we use different vocabulary when we're talking to our co-students versus our parents and our family versus our teachers, and difficulty gauging that based on the situation. That can be difficulty with politeness rules and knowing, okay, in this space, this is how I'm supposed to behave to be polite, and remembering that those rules shift when you move into different spaces. That can be straying off topic and not sort of realizing that, okay, at recess, I can shift the topic. In math class, in the middle of the teacher's lesson, that's not a good time for me to shift the topic. A big one is gauging timing for jokes. And for that, I don't mean knowing how long to wait before you say the punchline, but sort of that same math class analogy of knowing, so I'm in the middle of my teacher talking in math class right now. What do I know about what's expected of me? And is this a good time for me to crack a joke, or is that going to give my teacher a feeling? And then knowing also what other people in your space know about something. So giving the context or deciding what to share based off of the knowledge of the other people all sort of play into situational awareness. So what that looks like for the lower school is helping take implicit knowledge about common spaces and social situations that our students engage in and make that explicit for students. So there's a couple different strategies that we use very consistently, and this is one of those strategies that, again, may help certain profiles specifically, but all of our students really benefit from explicitly engaging in this work and stopping to think about these things. So for our youngest students, our BR2s and third graders use a curriculum called Social Detectives, which is a social pragmatics curriculum that really looks at how do I get information from the space and the people around me? So how do I know where the group is and if my body is part of that group? How do I know if I'm doing things that are part of the group plan? And this is the language that's part of the Social Detectives curriculum. There's a whole section we do that we say your eyes are like arrows. So your eyes point at what you're thinking about and can give you information if you point them at the thing that you need to get information about. And then for our older students, we use primarily STOP. STOP is an acronym. It stands for Space, Time, Objects, People. I know Gwendolyn will mention they talk about that a lot at the middle school as well as in the upper school. And it's questions that students can ask themselves. We often have students stop and use the STOP strategy as they're entering a new space or hitting a transition point to think of, sort of get them in that set of what do I need to do? So the questions we might ask for space is, where am I right now? What happens in this space, or what usually happens in this space? Time is, what time is it? What can that tell me about what's expected? So my homeroom is the same space, but if I walk in at 8 a.m. versus 12:20, there's a different expectation about what I'm supposed to do. Objects are what objects you see around you, and if those can give you clues about what you're supposed to be working on right now or what you might be expected to do when you settle into class. And then P is the people. So that's what people are here. How do I interact with the people that are here, or how am I typically interacting with those people? And what language or routines are typically part of interacting with those people? And so taking a second to stop and sort of preview all of that information before you enter a space or a situation can be really beneficial for our students. And then there's also stopping to think about materials you might need for a space. So you can see this example for students when they're entering a flex class, that it's every day I need my computer, headphones, and binder. So I should stop at the door and self-assess that rather than settling in and when the teacher says, okay, let's get started, going, oh, shoot, I have to go get my headphones. So helping to build those skills in is part of situational awareness for the youngest students.
Thank you for that, Jen. So in the middle school and upper school, situational awareness is also just as key, especially helping students in the social pragmatic piece of sometimes just sort of self-monitoring about the types of language they're using and where they are and who is around them. Just something in the middle school, helping students to understand that, you know, jokes that they say in recess might not be something that we want to say when we're in history class. So we use the STOP curriculum to sort of use like reminder language for students to help them think, we're in history class right now. Let's kind of think, what language should we be using here? So we definitely teach that curriculum to students in morning meetings, and then we use that as a way to kind of help students redirect throughout the middle school process. Then in space and time is a great way if a student needs some support with helping their mind or body fit the energy of the space, they might go to the space and time, relax for a little bit, take a little bit of time to just help them unwind. So that way they'll be more aware of the situation around them when they come back. We also make sure that we always have structured daily and class routines so that students are very aware of what they should be doing when the situation arises. When they walk in every single day to NCLU, they know what planners they need to get out. They know what desk they should be sitting at. We also make sure that we always have those visible group expectations, which is something that is very key for our middle school students. So they know in this classroom, these are the expectations they should be having. So they're never guessing it depending on the situation that they're in. Some individual strategies might be teacher check-ins or counseling debriefs. If a certain student wants to talk through a situation where maybe their energy was a little bit higher and they were very active, a counselor might just kind of take them on a walk and help them debrief and sort of notice where their body was and where they actually were in physical space. We also do explicitly teach that stop flex curriculum and a little bit more in-depth version for a few students. And thinking about that situational awareness that we use at Carroll, what are some of those things that you could use at home? That stop is my personal favorite. Just throwing out there is the space, time, objects, and people around us. It's a really great concrete strategy to help students sort of break down things that some of us might take for granted, as knowing what might be appropriate volume of voice on the soccer field might not be an appropriate volume of voice if you're at a restaurant. So next, we're going to touch base on organization. I think Jen's going to take over for this one.
So organization is a cognitive skill that isn't necessarily explicitly an executive function skill, although I think most of us, when we hear the term executive function, picture organization or a lack thereof. But organization is actually a higher level skill or series of skills that are supported by someone's executive function skills. And they relate to someone's ability to arrange ideas, objects, time, actions in a meaningful order, in a logical way. So as we move into organization, I put up this picture and this quote from, I don't know if anyone has seen on Netflix, the show The Home Edit, which is a personal favorite of mine. I find it incredibly soothing. But this is their tagline, where anytime they organize something, they say, it's a system. And the reason I bring that up is there's a difference between everything having a place and everything having a logical place and it following a system. And so when we're talking about the cognitive skill of organization, what we really want to aim for is there being a system, not just knowing where everything is because that's where I put it down and I have a really good memory, but knowing where everything is because there's a logical place that it goes if it's a material, or knowing when I'm supposed to do something because there's a logical schedule that I've imposed on my day. And there are a lot of skills that go into keeping a student organized, which we're going to touch on sort of briefly each, which can be independently engaging in routines, managing materials, managing time, which is a big one, and then organizing our ideas internally. So routines help us sequence complex multi-step tasks, but complex familiar multi-step tasks. And they help students learn to visualize all those steps, which helps build their independence. And the key for routines is that a routine is a routine, not because it's a sequence, but because it's a consistent sequence. And doing it the same way every time is what helps students to be able to visualize and then execute independently. The other thing that I think is probably more relevant to our younger students is that routines and understanding the sequence and passage through routine help us to develop those foundational sequencing skills that build our sense of time passing. And that's really not when we talk about, do students have a sense of time, can they read a clock? But when we say like, they don't know if 5 minutes have passed or 2 hours, routines can really help us build that as we move, as we become more familiar with them. Consistent routines also really help minimize anxiety, especially for our students who struggle with multi-step directions and visualizing that so that they don't have to hold all of that information in their working memory. So now is where these skills that we've been talking about are all starting to layer on top of each other, that for our students who struggle with working memory and maybe struggle with attention and language comprehension as well, you've given a multi-step direction, they're trying to hold all of that information in their brain, then they start to get anxious. That makes it harder to hold that information in their brain. So routines are a really great strategy to help minimize that anxiety because the student doesn't need to remember it because they know the routine. There are a lot of routines that we do at school. We put in bold the ones that transition really well to home, but that can be things like your morning routine for school, that's settling into the classroom, but at home that could be getting out the door, settling into school, a do now routine like we had at the beginning of the presentation. A lot of students or a lot of classrooms will have a do now up on the board to help students transition in. Daily schedules, classroom agendas, mealtime routines, homework planners, homework completion, and bedtime routines. All are things that help the child predict what's going to happen next. So just to sort of summarize it, routines are really important because they help us visualize and keep track of what has already happened, what is happening right now, what's coming next, and how do those things relate to each other. And then how does routines connect to perspective taking and social pragmatics? They really play it because a lot of our conversation throughout the day, or our transitional conversation, sort of when we're transitioning into a topic and then back out of a topic, are conversational routines. And I think a lot of times we talk about this as small talk, but they really do serve a purpose. They're not just small talk because they help us predict how we're going to interact with other people and when that's going to happen. And it can also trigger for us when something doesn't follow that routine. So not only does it help us know, okay, what am I going to be asked next? What can I anticipate? This is transitioning into a conversation or out. It can signal that we're moving on from this topic or we have more to say about it. But also, if someone does not follow a conversational routine that they typically follow with you, that can be a trigger to say, oh, that was unexpected. Something's different. Is it because there's a change in the setting and we can start pulling in those situational awareness skills? Let me look at their face and their body language and their tone of voice. Are they upset? Is it in response to something I did, or am I just walking into the situation? So these social routines also can be really important for students to understand. We are big on routines at the lower school. We refer to the first 6 weeks of school every year as routine setting. And we also refer to the first week back from December break, which we're just wrapping up, as routine setting part 2, because it builds culture and it's what helps our students settle in to know what to expect in the classroom, to know where the materials are, to know what they're supposed to be doing, how they're supposed to be attending, how to sit at their desk, who their teacher is, what kinds of things they're going to be asked to do, what is the language we use in this classroom. And those skills have to be in place before we can actually start teaching the content, because without those, our students have a really hard time accessing class moving forward. And as I mentioned, keeping those routines consistent is the best thing we can do for our kids, because that's what makes them predictable and builds our students' independence, sort of spiraling back to that gradual release model. And as we mentioned, predictable routines help remove all those confounding variables that can impact our ability to execute tasks, like anxiety, listening comprehension. We have a lot of routines at the lower school. They can be social routines. So every classroom at the lower school starts with a responsive classroom morning meeting routine every morning. That includes a greeting, a sharing activity, some kind of active activity, and a morning message to introduce students to their day. We all start with that routine and close with a closing circle routine. And it can also look like a initial routine for starting class. For example, that slide on the bottom is a 5th grade language class that every single day when you settle in, you come in, we do 3 deep breaths together, and then there's 1 or 2 activities that I can look at and see what's coming up in my day to start to predict that.
In the middle school, we are also huge on routines because developmentally in the middle school, students still need a lot of parent support with building routines, and even in the upper school for our 8th and 9th graders as well. You know, most executive functions don't really finish developing until age 25, when our frontal lobes finally finish our development there. Because it takes so long, some students still need support with building their routines. And so in the middle school, what we do is we have our do now transition routines at the beginning of every class. At the end of class, we have our exit ticket routines. We also typically have weekly routines within classes. So most teachers try and teach one skill on Monday, the next skill on every single Tuesday. Every single Thursday might be the writing day in an ELA class. So that way students start to not only get in their daily routines, but also their weekly routines. Then we end every single class day with no child left unorganized, which is that time of the day when students can touch base with their teachers, ask questions, make sure that they have everything that they need. Some individual strategies that we do use is visual previews of daily schedules. Sometimes we will review a daily schedule every morning with the student, give them daily schedule cards as they're walking around. The homework planners at the upper school have that built-in daily schedule for all students to look at. And then some students also benefit from previewing of unusual routine days. So whether it's a fun unusual routine like fall festival, or even a fire drill can actually really disrupt a regular student's daily routine. So by previewing some of those unusual days, we can help students sort of feel like even though this isn't a regular routine, they still know what to expect and what's coming. Another great strategy is just reminders for the next class and activity. Before they leave the classroom, ask them, where is your next class? What will you be talking about in this class? Just to help the student begin to prepare to transition to their next academic class. So next we're going to be talking about another type of organization and management, which I think is what people typically think of the most when you're thinking of executive functions, is how do you manage your materials? How do you keep your workspace organized or not organized? It's okay. So effective management of materials supports the student's readiness to learn by relieving that cognitive load for task initiation. What this means is it helps students know exactly where the materials are so they can quickly get started with that academic task. For older students, managing materials might mean relying heavily on managing their Google Classroom use so they know where all of their topics are on Google Classroom and they understand what homework section might be, what resources might be under which tabs. And it also might be managing their Google Docs within their Google Drive, making sure they have folders for all their information and they don't have unnecessary materials in there. In perspective taking, it's kind of unusual to think that how we use objects can impact us socially and prospectively, but when you start thinking about it, it actually can really impact the way that students connect with their peers. So some students using materials in a way so that they don't distract others, if they have fidgets or other mindfulness toys that might help them stay focused in class, using materials in a way that respects the owner, making sure that they're aware of whose material this is and that they're being aware of how they are using it and handling it. And also asking others before using a shared material. Sometimes we have students who are very excited about a new material and want to just use that, making sure that they're asking those permission. And all of that's important for perspective taking and those social communications, making sure that you're respecting the materials around you.
So at the lower school, again, that's really helping students to have a system, there's that word again, system, where everything doesn't just have a place, but everything has a logical place. And the reason behind that is that the system has to make sense to kids for them to be able to use it effectively. So that's why the system and sort of the organizing principle might look different across different grades. So for example, in our BR2s, we often organize things by day of the week. So if they take home a homework binder, it will look like what goes home for Monday, what goes home for Tuesday, regardless of subject area, because days of the week is a concept and a sequence that those students understand. When we move into 3rd and 4th grade, they might have a different section in their binder for language, for math, and for tutorial, because content is now a way that we can organize that information. And then by the time we get to 5th grade, that might look like, as Gwendolyn started to mention, organizing on Google Classroom. And not only do they have to go to their language Google Classroom, but then within that, there might be a section for homework or a section for the project I'm working on right now, or all of the graphic organizers for my essay. And that really, again, supports their readiness to initiate a task because they can independently access the materials or the information that they need. When we think about that social piece, that can also look like both organizing the information we have about other people and sharing materials with others and knowing what's a shared material, what are the expectations for shared materials, and that perspective taking piece of if I don't put this material back where it came from in its logical place, then the next person who needs it won't be able to find it.
Those all very important parts of material management. In the middle school, as we mentioned, we mostly are using Google Classroom, but then we also do have physical binders that we have for students where we work with them to use their tabs and make sure that their homework is always in the homework section of their binder and their vocabulary might be in the vocabulary section of their ELA tabs, while their written work might be in their writing section there. So those binders and tabs are excellent for helping students practice physically putting and organizing materials. Then we also have regular binder checks during NCLU and also support an email with the upper school and middle school to help students make sure they're keeping their emails organized and deleting information in emails they don't need anymore. The map logs is the make a plan log that every single student has, which is where students might get a note from a teacher about a missing assignment or a missing material, and they can make a plan about how they can get that done. At the upper school, they have up forms where every 2 weeks, students get some feedback and communicate with their advisor about any missing assignments or classwork or materials that they might need to be bringing into class the next day. And this is just a way to help students get some of that external feedback and support with making sure that if they forgot a material or a task, that other adults are still helping them get checked in and making sure they're staying on track. Some other students might have some individual check-ins before projects to make sure they have all the materials needed for their assignments. We also might use a missing assignment tracker if there's students who want to make sure they're keeping track and organized and have plans for how they're going to miss up or mix or make up an assignment after a long vacation. We also have support creating Google Drive folders for some of our students. So that way they're able to easily find items in their Google Drive. Our next part is time management, which it might seem odd to think that we're organizing time, but it is very important because sometimes you might take a little bit longer on your presentation like you had planned. Sorry about that. So some cognitive skills related to monitoring and managing the passage of time is very important, obviously, because it's being able to self-reflect on how much time you have spent, estimate how long a task will take, break down a task and chunk it into specific times, prioritizing your tasks and which you're going to do first based on deadlines. And then just also understanding how long is a day or a week and a month. For some of our students in the lower school, that's something that they really need to help conceptualize. For them, a week might feel like forever. And then also just understanding how to share time with others, especially in longer communications and unstructured time, making sure that they're not taking up all the talking time there.
So before you can manage time, you have to have a solid understanding of the passage of time in that internal sense. And for many of our students in first, second, third, and even fourth and fifth grade, that's not really solid yet. So one way we support that, which is, I think, actually probably, now that I'm saying it, probably my number one home recommendation, is to make the passage of time visible for students, both in the sequencing and the actual quantity of time, like how many minutes did that take. A really great tool that is really easy to just order on Amazon is a time timer, which is that timer that's in the middle of the slide. It works on an hour, but that red part actually ticks down. So visually, even if students don't know, like 20 minutes, that seems like kind of a long time. Now it's 5 minutes. I think that's less. They can actually see the size of that red piece getting smaller. And that helps them to start to build that sense of what's a big amount of time, what's a smaller amount of time. Helping students sequence is also helpful. So we use a lot of visual schedules, both within classes, within their whole day. Over on the left is one that we've used with our youngest students that also works in that structure of get ready, do, done, to help students know this is the sequence of my whole day. But actually the most important things for me to keep track of are really what am I doing right now and what's coming up next. Beyond that, it's all here if I need to reference it, but this is what I'm thinking about right now. And then it can also look like students or teachers helping support students by breaking up a longer project or a more complex activity into smaller, manageable parts. There's also ways that we can help support students' own understanding of their own time management. We talk a lot about time robbers at the lower school. I actually don't know, Gwendolyn, if you use these at that language at the middle school too. She's nodding. I know you all can't see her. And time robbers are really, what we talk about them is, where did the time go? What stole that time from you? For students who, class is ending and they're like, well, I didn't have any time to finish that. And you're like, well, you had 40 minutes. And they're kind of like, well, what happened? Why didn't I have enough time? That can be really purely executive function time robbers. Like maybe they got distracted. Maybe it was an initiation challenge, like they didn't know where to start. Or it can often be social, like they were chatting with friends or they were distracted by what a friend was doing. So helping students understand what time robbers are at play for them and what are strategies to use to get back on track can be very helpful as well.
We definitely talk about time robbers in the middle school. In the evenings, sometimes students are talking about how they have no time at all, but we like to break it down in the middle school with nights at a glance, where we have our entire evening, you see that like rightmost section, kind of laid out, and students have a moment to really look at how much time they have in a day. We also, for some individual students, do a time management curriculum where they sort of have 24 hours and estimate how much time are they doing each activity. And interestingly enough, many students either overestimate how much time they're doing and they're adding things up and they're like, I have 30 hours of things. I'm like, probably not spending as long as you think. Or sometimes other students have not enough time. They only have 17 hours in their day allotted. They have no idea what's happening for the other hours unaccounted for. So being able to talk through these things with students helps them begin to understand these conceptual.
So Jen, do you want to pick it up? I think the last thing Gwendolyn said was people understanding this conceptual, and we're talking about the time framework.
Yes, and I think actually, Gwendolyn, I think might actually be back. That might have been good timing. I actually think, Gwendolyn, you were just kind of wrapping up the sort of how that can be individualized.
Yes, thank you so much. I apologize for all the internet connection fun. But some whole class strategies that we do use is homework that is designed to be completed within specific timeframes and larger projects that have dates specified of when you should be completing each step, timers used for individual work time, just so they can visually see the passage of time, not so much with that actual red countdown, which is super cool that you have in the lower school, but maybe just an actual timer going in. And then long-term projects with those suggested timelines as well.
All right, so this is our last topic. I'm going to try to move through it quickly because, as Gwendolyn mentioned, our time management got awry. But sort of the highest level of this is organizing ideas. And as students grow and develop, they're able to apply these same organizational strategies we used for materials and for time and for routines to organize their thinking. And that helps them tackle more complex learning tasks, reading tasks, and writing tasks. Organizing our thinking logically is really foundational to effective communication. If your ideas aren't organized in your head, they're not going to come out of your mouth organized. So it's also really key to effective communication, both orally and in writing as well. This is just to say, when do we need to systematically organize our thinking? We do it all of the time, academically and non-academically, when we're categorizing content to tie it to background knowledge, telling and writing stories that make sense, follow logical order, or on topic, making a persuasive argument. All of these things are based on organized thinking. And then how that's connected to perspectives, it's intimately tied to perspective taking, because perspective taking is actually a way that we organize our thinking about what we know about other people. So both organizing our thinking and perspective taking can look like telling a story that makes sense to other people because it's organized, follows a logical order, and takes into account what they know. It can help us follow the arc of a conversation so we don't get lost. It helps us identify what the topic of a conversation is, remember something that happened to you earlier and how that might relate to what you're doing or talking about now, and explaining something to others. So if you say like, oh, this is how you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, being able to convey those steps in a way that will make sense and follows the right order is really at its core a task of organizing your thinking. So at the lower school, again, it's making these things visible is kind of our guiding principle. And making both the connections and the sequences and these relationships between ideas that are implicit, explicit for our students and visual. As well as category relationships is another big one for our younger students, although our older students as well. And sort of along that gradual release is helping students to do the strategy with them and then be able to gradually move back so that they can interpret this on their own. So that can look like graphic organizers, reading comprehension strategies, again, those homework logs, but really helping students to understand how to organize these ideas on their own. And then just another quick example is we can also use that for social situations, that we can use that sort of same backward chaining of, okay, if I'm explaining how to make a sandwich, I start with what does the final sandwich look like? Then I think about, okay, how did I make it? What were the steps? And then I can think about what materials did I need? We can use that same backwards training to help students figure out if a social situation didn't go as they wanted, what happened? All right, here was the end result is you were angry and someone said, you know, X. What happened right before that? How did we get there? And use that same strategy to help students break it down.
There is all sorts of organization in the middle school and upper school, specifically in writing. Oh, so sorry, we have a neighbor going on. So what we mostly do is help students with organizing logical arguments, specifically with claims, making sure they immediately back it up with evidence, and then expand to reasoning. We want to make sure that they are organizing all their ideas there. Oh, I might just pause and let Jen wrap it up. But Jen, if you could take the lending there.
Nope, sorry, I was on mute. Yep, go on it. And again, it's really all of these same strategies, but at the upper grade levels, we might apply it to more organizing ideas for writing and that brainstorming process, that graphic organizer process, and then really having that narrative structure tie through into much more complex content. So, and I think we're just going to wrap up quickly. We were going to talk about effects of the pandemic, but we're going to move past that for time. And if you want to hear about that, feel free to send us an email. So overall, we just really wanted to say that EF is really central to many of our students' academic skills as well as their social skills. And it's a really a core root of a lot of what we work on throughout our day.
So thank you all so much. Thank you to Jen and Gwendolyn. I hope you guys all have a wonderful snow day tomorrow and that you learned a great deal about executive function and perspective taking. As I said, all of the questions that we've cataloged in the Q&A feature that we couldn't answer tonight, we'll be sure to get back to you. Should you have additional questions, please send them on to us at parentquestions@carrollschool.org. All right, take care. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.